Good afternoon, colleagues. We are in North Korea's Wonsan, a new resort that was built very quickly by the efforts of our Korean friends and which, in my opinion, is a very good tourist attraction. I hope it will be popular not only among local citizens, but also among Russians. Today, we held the second round of strategic dialogue. This format was launched at the request of Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, and Kim Jong-un, Chairman of the State Affairs Department of the Korean People's Democratic Republic. The first round took place in Moscow last year. This is where the second strategic dialogue takes place. We, the Korean People's Democratic Republic, are longtime neighbors and good partners. Last June, we signed a new treaty in Pyongyang, and we are allies. All this is due not only to our geographical proximity and shared history, but also to the coincidence of our positions and interests, both in terms of the development of our countries and peoples, and in terms of the main problems of the international and regional agenda. Today, my colleague and I, Comrade Choi Sung-hee, stated that the progressive development of our bilateral relations is in the interests of our countries and our states, and it contributes to the stabilization of the situation on the Korean Peninsula and to the strengthening of peace and security in the entire region of northeastern Asia. In the context of the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership mentioned by me today, we subjectively and frankly discussed the prospects of further activation of our political contacts, including on the line of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have just signed a plan for inter-Middle Eastern exchanges for 2026 to 2027. The document is rich and covers almost all key international issues. I would like to highlight that it also contains the tasks of foreign policy agencies to ensure the coordination of the work of other state structures in the sphere of practical cooperation, trade, economy, investment, humanitarian exchanges, tourism, and, importantly, the support of the Russian language in the DPRK and the Korean language in the Russian Federation. These are not just words. In both cases, there are specific training programs that are increasingly popular here and in the Russian Federation. We have positive dynamics in the sphere of practical cooperation. We consider it important to take additional measures to further increase the volume of trade between the two countries and have agreed that all these issues will be considered during the 12th meeting of the Russian-Korean Intergovernmental Commission on Trade, Economy, and Scientific and Technical Cooperation. We have paid great attention to the situation on the Korean Peninsula. We agree that the unregulated nature of the existing problems here has a negative impact on the general situation in North and East Asia, as well as on the prospects of equal and mutually beneficial interaction between all the states of this region. We spoke about the situation in the Asia-Pacific region. We consider it important to achieve the creation of reliable mechanisms here, ensuring equal and indivisible security for all states, mechanisms based on non-blocking approaches and on the generally recognized principles of international law. At the same time, we have emphasized the counterproductive nature and the danger of attempts by non-regional players to form a network of narrow-format bloc alliances in the Asia-Pacific region and promote the infrastructure of the North Atlantic Alliance here. We discussed the Russian initiative to form in Eurasia an equal, indivisible and comprehensive architecture of continental security. This initiative is supported by our Korean friends. And of course, one of the important elements of the architectural formation was our bilateral agreement on comprehensive strategic partnership. We discussed our joint work in the UN, on other multilateral platforms, and expressed satisfaction with the traditionally close level of coordination and mutual support. We exchanged views on the situation around the Ukrainian crisis. Our Korean friends confirmed their unambiguous support for all the goals of the special military operation and the actions of the Russian leadership, the Russian army, and in general, our citizens to ensure the achievement of these goals. In turn, we once again expressed our sincere gratitude for the contribution of the Korean military to the successful completion of the operation to liberate the Kursk region from Ukrainian Nazis and foreign mercenaries. I believe that the results of the second round of strategic dialogue deserve positive assessment. These results outline the further development of our strategic partnership in all areas of bilateral relations and in the international arena. Questions, please.
Good afternoon. Alexandra Bustritskaya, Russia 1. I have a question about high-level cooperation. President Putin arrived in July. How are things at the high level now? Do you plan to exchange personal messages?
Exchange?
Personal messages.
Messages?
Yes, personal messages.
You know, the President and the Chairman of State Affairs are in constant contact. They exchange messages regularly. No one is going to stop this practice, but our leaders will decide on a specific occasion for such an exchange. The same applies to their future contacts. They will certainly be, when and where, coordinated between the President and the Chairman of State Affairs.
Nikolai Ivanov. A year ago, a treaty on comprehensive strategic partnership was signed. You spoke about it today. What do you consider to be the main result of this year's work? Will the document be amended? The international situation is constantly changing.
The document does not provide for the amendment of the text of the treaty. However, the directions outlined in it are indeed strategic, both in relation to bilateral cooperation. I mentioned the active activity of the Intergovernmental Commission on Trade, Economic and Scientific Cooperation, as well as good progress in the humanitarian sphere, including the opening of special centers for teaching Russian in Korean universities and centers for studying Korean in Russian universities. There is an exchange of cultural events. The KNDR teams regularly tour the Russian Federation, and our theater and art figures take part in the events organized by the Korean People's Democratic Republic. One such example is the recent visit of the Minister of Culture of the Russian Federation, Olga Lyubimova, during which our theater teams took part. Undoubtedly, the treaty lays down the most important principles of our interaction in the international arena, of our alliance in the reflection of hostile actions and any attempts to carry out aggression against any of the sides of the treaty. In the foreign policy sphere, we have close coordination And both sides are actively supporting each other's positions in the United Nations and other multilateral venues. I believe that the treaty has contributed to a very powerful impulse of cooperation in all areas.
Способствовал приданию очень мощного импульса сотрудничеству, кооперации во всех областях.
Evgeny Shostakov, Russian newspaper. Mr. Putin, is there a long-term program for border cooperation between North Korea and Russia? And is it possible to cancel the visa regime between Russia and North Korea in the future?
We are moving towards actively involving the regions in our strategic partnership and alliance. The air traffic between Moscow, Khabarovsk, and Pyongyang has been restored, and the sea traffic is planned to be resumed. All this will develop contacts between people, and of course the direct interest will be shown primarily by the border regions of the Far East. They know North Korea well. There was a break in contacts due to the pandemic. There are still certain restrictions due to the consequences of the coronavirus. But I am convinced that these restrictions will be gradually lifted in the near future, and tourism will definitely develop. Our North Korean friends have expressed their interest in having more Russians in the wonderful resort of Wonsan and other resorts in the DPRK. I have no doubt that this will happen. Thank you.
Anastasia Dombitskaya, Sergey Viktorovich. You have recently admitted that the DPRK has facilitated the development of nuclear technologies, including the actions of the US in Libya. What conclusions do you think the North Korean side has drawn from the current US attacks on Iran? How can Russia contribute to the development of technologies in North Korea, including the nuclear component in this context?
The leadership of the DPRK has drawn the following conclusions long before the Israeli-American attacks on the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it is precisely because these conclusions were drawn in due time that no one is planning to use force against the DPRK. Although military construction around the DPRK, with the participation of the United States, South Korea, and Japan, is underway, we warn against abusing these relations to build them against anyone, including the DPRK and, of course, the Russian Federation. The technologies used by the DPRK are the result of the activities of the scientists of the Korean People's Democratic Republic. We respect the actions of the DPRK, and we understand the reasons why they are implementing their nuclear program.
Some time ago, a multilateral group of sanctions monitors, which includes 11 countries, including South Korea and the United States, released a report on the military cooperation between Russia and the DPRK, some aspects of which, according to them, violated the UN Security Council resolution. The DPRK Foreign Ministry called the report a provocation and a falsification. How does Moscow view these accusations? And what, in your opinion, causes such a reaction from Western countries?
This report, as well as the activities of this group created outside the United Nations, is nothing more than nonsense. The DPRK, Russia, and anyone else should be given an assessment of the actions. According to the principle of the UN Charter, only the Security Council and the structures created by it have the right to assess the actions. The Security Council, mentioned by you as a group, was not involved, and, as I have already said, was not even informed of how this was happening. We are not interested in this group. Its decisions and activities are initially pointless.
Hello, Varvara Nevskaya, Russia 24.
This is loud, this is normal.
You said earlier, in response to a question from my colleague from the Russian newspaper, that there is already a direct air message from Moscow, Khabarovsk, and Pyongyang. What other measures will be taken to develop the tourism potential in our countries?
I think that we are at the beautiful resort of Wonsan. On the agenda of the day, there should be a question of an air message from Vladivostok, maybe from Khabarovsk, and a ferry message. It is quite real. We discussed this prospect today. Profile agencies will certainly deal with this. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President. The President of South Korea has called for active actions to restore ties with the DPRK, emphasizing that this is a direct path to strengthening national security. You have already said that the issue of peaceful settlement on the Korean peninsula was discussed today during the negotiations with your colleague. Is Russia ready to help these two countries in the process of restoring relations? Did Washington address Moscow with a request to assist in building a dialogue with Pyongyang? We will judge the actions of the new South Korean administration not based on statements that the new president makes quite often, such as populist calls for eternal friendship. We will judge on specific matters. Specific matters are still in the same state they were in under the previous president and the previous South Korean administration. These matters are the development of the trilateral alliance between South Korea, Japan, and the United States, which is conducting military exercises more and more often with the addition of a nuclear component. This, of course, does not contribute to peace and stability, not only on the Korean peninsula, but in Southeast Asia as a whole. As for relations between the Korean People's Democratic Republic and Seoul, we will act exclusively in the areas that are acceptable and in which the DPRK is interested. This is our ally, and we will move away from this. As for the United States, I'm sure you have noticed that President Trump has spoken out for the resumption of contacts between the DPRK and the United States, including at the highest level. We have heard this, our friends have also heard this, and so far this is all.
Mr. President, is there a possibility of North Korea joining such formats as the SHOs and the BRICS?
You know, I cannot guess, because external contacts are the sovereign right of the Korean People's Democratic Republic. Today, my colleague touched on the issue related to the implementation of President Putin's initiative to form the Eurasian security architecture. We confirmed that the third conference on the subject of Eurasian architecture will take place in Minsk in October this year. Our Belarusian colleagues, with our support, have sent an invitation to our North Korean friends. They are considering it, and I hope that this will be a good reason to contribute to the discussions on this very topical issue.
Mr. President, you have highly appreciated the contribution made by the DPRK servicemen in the operation to liberate the Kursk region. Is it possible to involve the Korean People's Army servicemen in hostilities in other areas?
You know, we responded to the proposal of the head of the DPRK, the chairman of State Affairs. We had no reason to refuse this sincere expression of solidarity. We assume that the DPRK itself defines the forms in which we implement our strategic partnership agreement.
Do you plan to perpetuate the memory of the DPRK servicemen who died during the liberation of the Kursk region? How will our countries protect the historical memory of the future?
We plan to do so. This was our initiative, which was warmly supported by our Korean friends. A corresponding monument will be built, and we also plan to perpetuate the memory of our military brotherhood in the years of the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War.
I hope that in the near future these projects will have concrete outlines and will begin to be implemented. What was the last question? Speaker 11.
Will you defend the historical memory of the DPRK?
What was the last question?
Will you defend the historical memory of the DPRK?
Of course. First of all, we are actively educating our citizens, starting from school. Secondly, we defend our common victory at all international venues, first of all at the UN. We prevent attempts to defame it or to turn the situation upside down. The UN General Assembly holds a resolution against the heroization of Nazism every year. The DPRK is an active co-author of this document. The DPRK was also co-author of another of our initiatives on holding a special meeting of the General Assembly. In the case of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Second World War, it was decided to hold such meetings every 5 years for the next anniversary. This is also a very important opportunity to promote our common principles. Another example is that a group of friends is acting in defense of the UN Charter, and Russia and Canada are its members. In this format, initiatives are being developed, including those dedicated to the intolerance of the review of the results of the Second World War, the intolerance of the revival of neo-colonial practices in world politics. This is also a very important tool for promoting our common approaches, which are shared by many members of the UN. Nikita Korsun, TV company NTV. The coalition of so-called wishers, according to the Washington Post, is going to create a core of international forces to defend Ukraine after the ceasefire. In your opinion, how does this contribute to the principle of resolving the Ukrainian crisis, and what can be Moscow's response?
You know, we are not particularly interested in this. Unfortunately, they shout about it very loudly, so it is impossible to ignore it. But we do not take seriously the various fantasies of those who want to somehow shine in the international arena, and we are not going to discuss them. Thank you.